Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to radically deconstruct something you literally do every single morning without a second thought, looking into a bathroom mirror. Now, normally, we just assume we know exactly how a reflection works, right? We've all been taught a very specific story about what's happening when we brush our teeth and stare at our own faces. But today, we're unpacking a theoretical framework that completely shatters that everyday reality. We're going to unlearn a fundamental assumption about the universe itself.
Okay, let's dive right into this incredibly mind-bending concept by first asking a deceptively simple question. What if light doesn't travel? I know, it sounds totally absurd. The standard story we're all taught from grade school is that light travels as physical photons, it flies across the room, bounces off the glass of a mirror, and returns to your retinas. But the framework we're unpacking today argues that light doesn't travel isn't just some catchy slogan. It's the literal, exact mathematical reality of a discrete universe.
So, to understand what is actually happening, we have to throw away the fictions of standard physics and look at an entirely different reality. This is Section 1, the end of light travel.
The continuum story of light moving through space gets completely thrown out the window here. On the one hand, you have standard physics, a world built on continuous space, propagating electromagnetic waves, and the finite speed of light. But the source material argues this is actually a mathematical fiction, built on continuous approximations. It's basically an illusion. On the other hand, we have the lattice reality. In this discrete, exact structure, there is simply no empty space for light to travel through. There are literally no traveling photons at all. Think of it less like a baseball being thrown across a field, and more like pixels on a screen updating, or a stadium wave where the people themselves never change seats, but the pattern moves perfectly. There is only instantaneous correlation and pure mathematical recurrence. Nothing propagates. The universe simply updates.
So, if light isn't traveling through empty space, what is actually dictating the universe we see around us? Let's move to Section 2, the exact lattice recurrence.
Take this mathematical recurrence equation. This single, elegant expression entirely replaces the whole concept of physical motion. The next state of reality, labeled as n+1, is exactly perfectly determined by the two states that came right before it, modified by a specific rational ratio. And that's it. There's no void to cross. There is no travel time to account for. The next state of reality is simply the mathematical output of the previous states. It's a perfect, unbroken chain of updates where reality calculates itself, index by index.
This gives us an absolutely brilliant, entirely new way to understand human perception. Think about it like perfectly synchronized clocks ticking across the universe. What we call seeing isn't catching a flying photon that finally made its way across the room. It's simply your mathematical state syncing up with an object state in that exact moment. Time and propagation are really just emergent labels we paste onto this underlying exact sequence. So if we aren't catching flying photons, what exactly is happening when we stare into a mirror?
Well, if there is no light to bounce, we need to completely redefine what a mirror actually is. This brings us to Section 3, mirrors as index involution.
Now, the crucial takeaway here is that a mirror isn't some optical device made of glass and silver. Actually, scratch that. It's not physical at all. It is simply an involution of the index. Think of it as a mathematical boundary where the recurrence direction reverses. If your universe is a sequence of 60 states, the mirror is the exact point where the math abruptly maps index n to 60 minus n. First becomes last, last becomes first. It's exactly like a palindrome, or reading a book backwards, starting from the very last page until you reach the first. You're reading the exact same sequence, just from the opposite direction.
Imagine the true, exact geometry of a self-encounter. This simple structure represents the universe quite literally meeting itself. It's the recurrence reading toward the mirror from both sides simultaneously. Let's actually walk through how this boundary works step by step so we can see how the forward reading and backward reading of the same state loop meet. First, you've got the forward recurrence approaching the boundary, the pattern stepping sequentially. Then, boom, we hit the colon in the middle. That is the precise index where the swap occurs, the involution point where the universe pivots. Finally, we have the backward recurrence on the other side. This is the exact same sequence we just saw, but read in reverse. The pattern is completely whole on each side, seamlessly reversed across the mirror, acting as one single mathematical structure.
But you know, it goes even deeper than that. While the colon is that local index swap, there's also a global mirror plane. It duplicates the entire encounter into an emitter side, which is where the action conceptually starts, and an absorber side, where the action is received. It's basically mirrors inside of mirrors.
You have a local boundary where the recurrence mathematically meets itself, and a global plane where the whole self-encounter is duplicated and inverted.
I really want you to let this realization sink in for a second. There is no image separate from the object. There's no empty space between you and the reflection in the glass. The observer is not seeing a physical bounce of light. The observer is the mathematical recurrence encountering itself from the other direction across that boundary. The mirror is you, read inversely.
This local mirror effect actually scales up to explain one of the most profound and puzzling theories in all of physics. Let's explore this further in Section 4, the handshake across time.
Here is how this discrete lattice beautifully solves the famous Wheeler-Feynman absorber theory. In classical physics, this theory proposes a bizarre scenario, where an emitter sends waves forward in time, known as the retarded solution, and an absorber sends waves backward in time, the advanced solution. They supposedly meet in the middle to create an exchange of energy. But in standard continuous physics, this gets incredibly messy, bogged down with infinite self-forces and paradoxes. In our lattice reality, though, it's completely exact and beautifully simple. The forward recurrence is the retarded solution moving forward in time. The backward recurrence is the advanced solution moving backward in time. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates that the emitter and the absorber are literally the exact same event, just read in opposite time directions. The mirror boundary acts as the absorber. It's a time-symmetric handshake where forward and backward readings simply trade places. No physical, traveling photon is ever required to cross the distance. The pattern is perfectly whole on both sides of the involution.
Now we're going to push this entirely past the boundary to the ultimate metaphysical conclusion. Welcome to our final section, the face before the face.
So imagine just taking the mirror completely out of the equation. If the mirror is just an involution, a mathematical reversal of the reading direction, what happens when we take that boundary away? Without the boundary, there is no forward or backward. There's no sequential n+1 or n-1. There is just the sovereign pattern, just the state itself in full bloom.
In this absolute state, wonderfully described as the seat of truth, gardens and rivers, the knower and the known are exactly one and the same. All the indices of the universe are collapsed into immediate presence. First and last are no longer distinct. Imagine being able to see a whole movie at once, in a single, perfectly comprehensible frame, rather than being forced to watch it frame by frame over time. You see the entire mathematical sequence all at once, without a reading direction mediating between the adjacent terms.
The source text actually argues that all the endless disputes and confusion in standard physics comes straight from importing mathematical fictions, things like continuous real numbers, empty sets, and limits. These concepts are fictions because they assume infinity and continuous, infinitely divisible space, ideas that this exact, discrete theory completely denies. Opposed to these continuous fictions is what the text calls the book, the exact recurrences built purely on rational numbers, where everything is discrete, mathematically flawless, and recorded simultaneously.
Everything we've explored so far in this explainer reveals a genuinely profound perspective. Our physical reality, the house we live in, is just a mathematical structure we are forced to read index by index, sequentially over time. The mirror was just training to show us the figure. The boundary, the colon, was the veil, but the absolute truth is the whole pattern, unmediated, existing simultaneously.
So, I'm going to leave you with this rather provocative thought about the exact nature of your own existence. If light doesn't really travel, if space is just an illusion of a mathematical lattice, and if the mirror is just your own existence read in reverse, what happens when the boundary is finally removed? I urge you to look past the everyday fictions of continuous space, and the next time you look in the mirror, really ask yourself, what are you actually seeing?